Hello, Dr. Haley. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great, Taylor. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited to talk today. We were just talking offline how there's lots of intersections in the content that you and I both talk about. Intersection between sport and business, and the skills that you learn from being an athlete, and how you apply those in the business and the career space. So I'm excited to uncover that and see where the conversation goes today. I thought a good place to start would be just to set a bit of a framework with some of the language that you use. And I know in your new book, which is called The Personal Podium, which is a bestseller on Amazon, that one of the things you talk about is a mental block. And I thought that it would be a good place, a good jumping off point, just to have you define what that is from your perspective, because there's a lot of mental performance, mental, challenges, lots of language out there. And some of those definitions can get muddy, or maybe they're not clear to begin with. And so I'd love for you just to walk us through what is that from your perspective, from your experience as an athlete, as a high performance coach, as a mental performance coach, and let's use that to set the stage and branch off from there. How's that sound?
I think it's a great place to start because that's primarily why people come to me. They have a mental block. No one really comes to me when they're happy and everything's going well. People come to me with a mental block, which is, if I can just make it really simple, which is how I liked to work for myself. A mental block is simply a story, usually negative in nature, but a story, real or imagined, that has the potential to debilitate our performance. And I just really want to highlight that word potential. Doesn't have to hurt us. But if we let it, or if we don't have the tools to work with it, overcome it, refute it, it can hurt us.
That's interesting, that I hear you say that and I'm like, okay, yeah, no, that is obvious, but it's not honestly where even I would go necessarily, right? Like that it is just a potential. Like it doesn't have to derail you. I think that is, for me and even some of my own personal challenges, and then for people I work with, it is assumed that it has already derailed you or will derail you. Not that you could step away from that or backpedal in a way that maybe doesn't create as much of an impact. Walk me through that. What are how do you help people, or in your experience, how can you get ahead of it, that potential opportunity for it to be disruptive?
Yeah. It's a really straightforward lesson, and it doesn't mean that we're always going to buy into it right away, but we have to come to an understanding that we are not our thoughts. And sometimes it's just our thinking. And this was a valuable lesson that I learned many, many years ago, probably about 10 years ago. It was just, I knew it, but this is the moment I bought into it. I was with a mentor of mine who's one of my greatest friends. And I was at her house with a huge mental block. I was just upset. I'm pretty sure I was crying. And her 10-year-old daughter looked at me and said, "Haley, it's just your thinking." And it was like this moment. And then for whatever reason, that statement, "it's just your thinking," helped me to really go back into all of my education and all of what I know about our thoughts. And it's just our thinking, and we can choose to believe them, or we can choose to refute them or discount them, laugh them off, shrug them off, but we are not our thoughts. Now, if we repeat them, if we connect with them, if we strengthen that bond and their neural pathways, and it's a process called myelination. If we let those thoughts grow and grow and grow and secure a very habitual place in our mind, then essentially we become that belief, or we live according to that belief. But at the onset, it's just our thinking.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a lot of the people that I talk to, and probably you as well. I think it's kind of a habitual language that is represented just kind of in high performing cultures. And the example that I'm thinking about is, you know, you ask somebody how they are, and the first thing that they say is, I'm busy. You know, and I think for me, I'm able to draw a bit of a line there, is that, you know, that is a choice, right? To show up in that way versus show up in alignment with opportunity, in alignment with the wins that are happening because you're busy. You know, there's any number of routes that you could go, and so I don't know. And I guess my question is, does that show up in other ways? Like, if the mental block is just, you know, if we're not our thoughts, are we also able to decide to be happy versus sad? Are we able to, you know, how are we able to like leverage our, I guess, decision-making process to navigate these like challenges, right? Whether it's emotional, whether it's mental blocks. Is there a commonality or a through line there, or is that a different practice altogether?
No, and I think, Taylor, what you're talking about, which is real, is, you know, the difference between the subconscious and the conscious.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go back to our thoughts, well, let me put it this way: every habit that we have was once what we call a ritual. So a habit is something that's in our subconscious that we automatically do. We don't have to think about it. And it can be habitual thinking, and it can be habitual behaving, performing. But every one of those habitual thoughts or behaviors was once a ritual that we did consciously. So it was in our awareness, in our conscious, you know, living. But with repetition and frequency, the ritual that was in our conscious mind became a subconscious thought. So now it's a habit. So in order to break those habits, we have to go back to the conscious mind and figure out thoughts that we want to, you know, use, that we want to embrace. And then with repetition and frequency, it's training like any muscle. We want that thought to grow and grow and grow, and then that to become our habitual. And to answer your next question about, is, you know, sad and happy, I don't know that I completely believe that we can 100% all the time immediately control our thoughts and our emotions. Mm-hmm. But I do know that we do have control over how long we let them linger. And so if I find myself sad, which I 100% do, I can, you know, once I become aware of them, and again, that takes practice. This is all conditioning. We condition our body, we have to condition our mind. Once I acknowledge that I'm sad, I then have the strength, the mental toughness, if you will, to decide, okay, is this sadness helping me or is it hurting me? And if it's hurting me, okay, what can I do to change that emotion? And often, not all the time, but often it's with my thinking. Mm-hmm. And I can change my thinking, and then I can change that feeling of sadness. So there's some training involved, and the difference is that we've got to find a way to target our consciousness. And then with repetition and frequency and training of that, it then becomes the habit that we want to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I use that analogy all the time. You know, you have to work the muscle, right? And it's just like in our physical bodies, we have to continue to work it if we want to see growth, performance improvements, and then same thing on the mental side. Although it strikes me, and I'd be interested to get your take and experience here, is that it's always struck me that it seems like a more straight line for people to draw, that is in fact the case on the physical side, but that is a much harder practice to deploy on the mental side, right? We say, yep, I got it. I got to go to the gym. I got to run. I got to do the thing that's going to yield the results. On the performance side, check, 100%. And then we say that on the mental, I'll add like mental emotional side, not quite as much of a checkbox, not quite as much of an immediate like, yep, I get it. Why is that from your perspective and experience? What makes it harder to grasp the real fact that you do have to continue to work that muscle, and then that is a process that has to be continually deployed and refined, just like on the physical side, but it's the implementation and execution seems to be a bit more challenging and maybe that's a little bit harder to take at face value for folks than on that side. What's your thoughts there?
I don't think it's maybe harder to take. I think it is. I completely.
Yeah, I'm trying to be nice to people who are listening. You're right. No, it's totally. I'm being aloof. It's way harder for sure, right? Like nobody's doing that as well as they are the physical side.
Right. I think for a couple of reasons. One is when it comes to behavior and performance, it's much more tangible. I can see, those muscles working. I know that I picked my body up and went to a gym. I saw it, it's much more tangible. The mindset isn't so tangible. That's why in what I do, I try to make it. I do my best to help people create a mindset as tangible as it can be, which is why I love the fact that you also say it's a muscle. Imagery is fabulous, because that's how we can experience our mind, building strength, in our imagination, but it's not tangible. And I think the other thing is, dopamine response, the reward response. We go to the gym, we go for a run, we get in the mountains, we get in the water, we do our thing. There's a dopamine response there. And waking up in the morning and, going through, my positive thinking, if you will, or my attributions or my gratitude, I don't know on the onset, because it's not so black and white. Even though I say to myself, I want to be grateful for all these things, those negative thoughts are still there. And there's this little bit of a tug of war. So I don't know that the dopamine response is as immediate as it is when we go for a run, for example, or we go lift some weights. So I think that putting those two things together are two of the reasons why the mindset is a tough one to break, a tough one to really, feel amazing about yourself. And actually, third one, now that I'm thinking about it, is the reason why we want to get our head straight is so that we can get our bodies to perform. And it's not an immediate thing. It does take time, and it is an internal battle. So we're not always going to reap the rewards. Not that I'm saying you always reap the rewards the first time you go to the gym, but you do reap a reward. And sometimes the mindset doesn't show you that reinforcement right off the bat.
Yeah.
If you're actually looking for a specific outcome, you don't always get it immediately just because you switched your mindset. It takes some time.
Right. Yeah, it's just, I hadn't really thought about the dopamine piece, but it's not quite as sexy. It doesn't feel as good. You don't get that feedback loop, or there's, it takes so much longer, and maybe it's, I think it's much more nuanced to find that kind of positive reinforcement in the mental performance side of things than the physical, right? Like you said, even if you go to the gym once, like you don't see any results, but you certainly can feel it, right? You're sore, you're tired, you train till your muscles are fatigued. If you're mentally fatigued, you're just tired, like you feel run down. And so it doesn't, it's not the same. It's not as cool to be fatigued mentally as it is to be fatigued physically. But that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about the dopamine piece, and I could totally see that there is that very real chemical piece that no matter how hard you try, you're just not going to get that, because of the way the body is wired. It makes me think about, I know one of the things that you talk about in your book is building a mental toolbox. And, once we've kind of thought about what a mental block is, this mental toolbox to be able to tackle challenges. And it feels like we're talking about, how do you work this muscle? Makes me think about that, like, building a robust toolbox, or a toolbox of any sort, to be able to tackle the inevitable challenges that will come up. It's not if, but when. What does outline that for me? What does that look and sound like for people to start to build some skills and a toolbox and resources that allow them to tackle these things, allow them to work that muscle with more confidence, more consistently, so that the outcome is ultimately improved, just like it would be on the physical side?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the ways I like to look at mental toughness, and it's interesting that we call it mental toughness because sometimes it's not about being tough at all. You mentioned sadness. Sometimes it's allowing yourself to be sad, and this is part of where I'm going. But one of the ways I like to think about mental toughness is being able to prepare best for the inevitable. And another is to be able to best cope with the unexpected. And your toolbox has everything you need to best prepare for all the things that may happen. I call it a what if plan in the book. And let's just take an endurance sport, an endurance, whatever it's going to be. Chances are you've been out there before. You've been out on the road, you've been out on the trail, you've been in the pool. So, you're going, so what type of mental blocks or obstacles or challenges, and they could also be physical, technical breakdown, your bike breaks down or something. And you have now a mental toolbox. Okay, well, I know if I get tired, if I feel pain, if I get a flat tire, if I get passed by someone who doesn't want to pass me, if it rains, if it's hot, you have all these what if situations that could happen. And like you said, it's not always if, it's when. We don't know, something inevitably is going to happen. And then right there you have, okay, I know how to walk myself mentally through this. Am I going to use my visualization? Am I going to use my affirmations? Am I going to go right down to the fundamentals and know where my strengths are fundamentally and just grab onto those and use them? Am I going to embrace this pain? Am I going to look at the good side of pressure? All these are tools, mental tools that we have in our toolbox. And the reason why we carry around a toolbox, just in case we need the hammer, just in case we need the nail. Well, these are our mental tools that when and if certain situations happen, we don't have to look around. We don't have to say, okay, what do I do now? You have it there in your toolbox. Mm-hmm. So again, training.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you have to put the things in the toolbox, right? Like you can't just show up with an empty toolbox. And that, I think, it makes, like you have to do the work of aggregating those tools so that you have them to use. Right. And that is, again, it's strengthening that muscle. And
then if I can dive in just a little bit, and then with the coping with the unexpected, here's the coolest thing about having this mental toolbox, because there are things that we can anticipate, challenges or obstacles going on. So those are the things we can prepare for because inevitably they're going to come. But also there's going to be things that we don't expect, uncertainty, right? So how do we best cope with them? Well, because we have this toolbox, we can be like, okay, we've never experienced this obstacle before, but I have all these tools, and now we get creative. Which ones can I use on this situation that I've never experienced before? So it's never coming to anything kind of empty, like you said, empty boxed. It's having tools, even though I've never been here before. I know my tools. I know how I best use them, and I can get creative here to overcome and keep going forward.
Mm-hmm. What's the strategy for managing? Maybe managing isn't the best word, but I'm going to say managing that initial, because there's still that like initial freak out, right? Like we can have the great toolbox, and we let's use the race example. Before an event, we're prepared, we've done all the training, we've visualized, we're done, and then inevitably you get a flat tire. And all that goes out the window, even if for a moment, right? And it can be hard to get that back, or hard to manage stress in relation to the tools that you have. So is that always part of the equation, that initial kind of human nature maybe freak out, or does that get better as well if the muscle is trained, or do we just have to cope with that and then come back to, because I can't tell you how many people I've worked with over the years, specifically on the athlete side and in a coaching capacity, not like in a mental performance capacity, but we go through all the things. We do the visualization, we prep, checklist. This is what happened. And then something happens and they don't, plan goes off the rails. So is there a way to manage that better, or do we just expect that? How does that, what's that like from your perspective?
Yes, yes, and yes. But you said it. You said the key thing, which is that we're human. It's a human thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the greatest athletes, Novak Djokovic, I love how he talks about he kind of like laughs off this whole idea of positive thinking 100%. He thinks it's a ridiculous concept, always positive thinking. We're human. Things go badly. We're allowed to be upset. We're allowed to be sad. We're allowed to be frustrated. The key principle here, which is also a big part of mental toughness, is not about being perfect. It's about being the best recoverer you can be. So yes, we're human, and you can be upset, disappointed, frustrated, angry, all of those things. And sometimes those are really powerful, positive, even though they're experienced as unpleasant, they can actually really help you. They can light some fire under you. They can help you get focused. They can give you a level of motivation that you never knew existed. So sometimes they're not always bad. Sometimes they're good. But the key is to bounce back quick. In other words, the key is to be the best recoverer. And the best athletes, the top business owners, really, the best performer, period, is not the perfect performer. It's the person that best recovers. And so allow yourself to be sad and then get up with, and this is where you say how you best manage it. Well, when you have the tools, when you have the mental skill set, you can bounce back and you can become the better recoverer because you have all that strength to figure out, okay, what do I do with this flat tire? To figure out, okay, what do I do with this pain? You're not starting from scratch. You have experience. And then lastly, the more and more you have these experiences, the more normal they become for you. So you don't get so attached to them. They're not as big. You don't catastrophize them. You can bounce back pretty quick because, okay, I've been here before and this is how I get through it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So again, I mean, you gotta work the muscle, right? And I think I've long said it makes me think about, I think so much of our ability to cope is having enough experiences. I talk about it through the lens of like sets and reps, right? Like you just have to do it enough and have the experience, right? Like if you get the flat tire in the race one time, well, the second time is not that big of a deal. The first time feels pretty traumatic. You're like, all this work and here I am, and how do I navigate the thing? But then the next time is dramatically reduced stress. And so, to your point, like you just have to know that you can cope with it. And then that coping becomes more and more streamlined in a sense as you've continued to do it. Cause it's not if, but when. I think about that in business all the time. It's every day, right? Like you have a plan and then you have to pivot, right? You have to do, it's never a straight line. Specifically in entrepreneurship, and great, when that starts to happen and you're early in business, it's pretty catastrophic. And then you're like, oh, that's, you don't even think about it at some point. You're like, oh, that's fine. And then you plan for it. You're like, okay, let's get a good plan together. And then let's plan for when the plan goes sideways, because we know it's going to happen. And then, and then that toolbox gets fuller and fuller. You have more devices in there, more mechanisms, more tools to help you manage that. So
what's that saying? Hope for the best, expect the worst. I don't know that I like that so much. I almost want to be expect the best, plan for the worst. Just so just to have, again, just to feel that I have the confidence to recover.
Yeah.
If and when I need it.
Right.
And
I've heard that too.
Have you?
Yeah, it's a little pessimistic for me. I'm like, I'm with you. I'm like, I think we could do a little better, but I understand the sentiment.
Yeah, I do too. And, it takes so much pressure off, don't you think? In business, oh my goodness, for sure. listen, I strive for perfection. I don't know anyone. Well, I've never worked with anyone who doesn't strive for perfection, want to be perfect. And I like that. But as soon as we demand it of ourselves, that is unnecessary negative anxiety. It's just unnecessary. And I'm playing around with this concept because, we hear coaches and leaders, failure is not an option, right. And I get the premise of it. We don't even want to look at it. But to me, failure is not an option. Well, it is an option. In order for someone to win, how many others have to lose? And you don't win all the time. Failure is an absolute option. And so if we just acknowledge that and then move on, what I've experienced in myself, oh my God, is so much freedom. I'm not, I don't have to be, failure is not an option. You can't do it. No, it does happen. It happens to all of us. Whew, what a sigh of relief. And now I can just focus on striving for perfection and being the best recoverer I can be.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm very much that person. I've worked to back off of that. And I have days where it's challenging. But my mantra is that one of them is, perfection is the enemy of progress. And, if the goal is forward motion and to grow as you continue to move forward, as you continue to progress, and then perfection is really the enemy of that, because it's always going to keep you from the next thing, right? Because it's not possible, right? There's the recognition that it is not going to happen. Even if you knock it out of the park, it could always be better, right? You could always, that's just a slippery slope that could go on forever. And
I remember when I had an athlete. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I had an athlete once who came to me. It was our first session together. She goes, okay, so I just want you to know, I'm not a clinical psychologist. My PhD is in sports psychology. I'm more of a consultant. And she came to me to tell me that she met with her clinical psychologist and she's been diagnosed with perfectionism. I don't believe that is a disorder, perfectionism, but she was telling it to me to give her an excuse for not being able to perform the way she wanted to perform. Well, I'm not performing well because I'm a perfectionist. That's what that was what my clinical psychologist diagnosed me as. And like you said, it's, a great excuse for not doing anything.
Huh. I've actually never heard that. I didn't know that was a diagnosis. Yeah, I would.
It's not. No, it's not.
Yeah, okay.
I think she was diagnosed with it, but I'm like, I don't think that's an actual.
Yeah, no, I've never heard that language. It's a good, and I think to your point, and I'll speak from my own perspective and experiences. I've used that. It's a really convenient out to have lots of different behaviors, whether that's how I show up for other people, right? Like, oh, I'm a perfectionist, and and so that's why I treat these people this way, because I can't I can't help it, right? Like, they're just not living up to the standards. I'm a perfectionist. Well, that's a really convenient out to not work on building really strong relationships with people and communicating effectively and navigating the dynamics of interpersonal relationships, specifically in the workplace. Relationship with myself, the list goes on. Yeah. So it's a really convenient place, above all else, just to stay really frustrated all the time. Right. And to your point, if it is very freeing, you could strive for greatness. Absolutely. Like, I want to reach my full potential, but to the extent that it, holds me back or keeps me trapped by all these standards that aren't really real, then it's not productive, and I like the, it's, what is it? Gitmo, good enough to move on.
I've never heard that.
I use that a lot at work. It's I'm like, and I didn't used to. I would have never said. A decade ago, no chance. I was, I would have been the person who stayed up all night trying to make it perfect. I'll use quotes. No, like get good enough. Sometimes good enough is good enough, and that can be great. Like, we've that language we often ascribe as it's on a lower rung, but no, like if that's it, right? Like if you went out and you did the race or you started the business and you gave it your all, like that's good enough. And that's enough, right? Like that could be totally fine.
It's all you can do anyways. But there's a difference. The last podcast I listened to it and I forget the title of it, but in one of your last podcasts, it was about just, staying consistent or strive. I forget the title of it now, unfortunately. But however, you were talking about just staying in it, like you said, staying in it, taking things in stride, something like that. Did you have and I have a little rule that I'm playing around with. I've started to share it. It's give yourself some grace. Because again, remember, perfection is not possible. So give yourself some grace. Never let yourself off the hook. And to me, we have to know the difference. And giving yourself some grace is understanding that sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes understanding that I woke up today and I really have only 80% to give. Not letting myself off the hook is giving 100% of that 80. Mm-hmm. Something will always be better than nothing. And only you and I know for ourselves if we're letting ourselves off the hook. I went to yoga this morning and she put us in chair pose, something she does every single class. And I love what she says about this. She says it every time. She says, okay, puts us in chair pose. And she says, this is the challenge you did not choose in life. And she goes, and you can't escape. Now you can make it easier if you'd like. I could stand up a little bit to take the load off. She goes, you can make it easier if you'd like, but how are you going to feel about yourself 5 seconds from now when it's over? And that's the difference between, maybe today because I did a leg workout yesterday, today I wasn't as my best in that chair pose, but I literally had a moment where I stood there and, I would love to release the pain a little bit. I'd love to make it a little bit easier. But the way she said it, I didn't look at myself. I thought to myself, I don't want to let myself off the hook. I want to stay in it. Even though it's not my best performance, I'm going to I'm going to give a max of what I have to give right now. And I'm not going to go easy on myself because then I'm not going to feel amazing 5 seconds from now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about that a lot, 100% of what you have to give in the moment or in the day. And I that really is one of the things that relinquishes a lot of pressure like I put on myself, is like 100% on any given day isn't and doesn't have to be the same. There are days when 100% is 100%. Great. Relish those, cherish them, lean in. But also some days it's 20%, right? I'm just, and 100% of 20% is better than zero. I'm not going to stay in bed. But the recognition that, not every day is better. And there's a kind of a popular sentiment out there that is, this like 1% better every day. And I'm like, I would say no, right? Like, like I might be 75% worse tomorrow, right? Like the real fact of the matter is, and I can still show up. Like I can still exercise. I could still do great work. I could still be a great person or to the best of my ability. And I'm not better than today. I'm just having an off day. I'm tired. Whatever. I'm stressed. And so again, I think that there's a real opportunity to always be striving, but to recognize that the pursuit of that is full of peaks and valleys, and it's okay that there's the valleys are there, right? The recognition that they're there. And some days you don't have 100% to give. And that's totally fine.
One of the greatest work, I think, is the concept of flow state. And Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, hope I said that right, say that 10 times fast. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who created flow, he said, because he calls it peak experience flow state. And the idea is when the demand meets your challenge. So if your current capabilities are here, I'm just putting my hand up by my nose, then the challenge is right up by my nose too. But that's really difficult all the time. So he gives us a little bit of some freedom. And you can challenge yourself just below your level of ability. So, if I can run, my five mile run typically takes me this, I can actually say, because you're not feeling the best, I have 80, whatever percent to give today. You can actually choose, like your intention, your goal is not to be the 1% greater, not even to match your current self. It's actually to go just below where you feel a sense, what he calls, that's the perceived control zone. It's still going to take effort, but you're not maxing yourself out, but you'll be very proud of yourself in the end. And then there's times where you just want to match, where you're not looking for that 1% better. You're actually just going out to match yourself. And then there's the moments where you do want to challenge yourself and go just above your current level of ability. And he calls that the arousal zone. When you feel challenged, when you're, but you maintain confidence. Anything higher is when you hit anxiety, when now you're challenging yourself too much. And with anxiety, you lose confidence. And anything way below is boredom and apathy. So he says to play around between the control, flow, and arousal. And I think that's exactly what you're saying. It doesn't always have to be this trajectory of 1% better every time. Sometimes I just want to feel in control today. So I'm just going to go below my current level of ability because of how the day is going for me, how I woke up, how the situation is. Give yourself permission.
Yeah. That's great. It's exactly, that really captures kind of the sentiment that I was driving at. And I think anything different than that really lands you kind of squarely in that comparison trap. It's very much the comparison is the thief of joy. And so if you're not in a place or not able to recognize that the full expression of 80% on that 5 mile run is great, it's only going to serve to create anxiety because you're comparing it against your best day you've ever had and the peak, and I talk about that a lot in lots of different areas. Business is one. It is more clear cut, I think, oftentimes in performance, like athletic performance, because we have metrics, right? My pace is this, my power is this, I lifted this or I didn't, right? And so, just show up, right? And like stack efforts day after day and just be okay with that, right? If this week you had to take 20 pounds off of your squat because that's how it felt, it's okay. You still showed up, right? And months down the line, you'll realize that effort will be realized, right? That little bit of stress, that little bit of opportunity, that time that you took will show up and manifest as like fitness. But you're not going to see it today, but know that like stacking the bricks over time is going to be, is all that really matters. Yeah.
The just showing up is the hard part, though. The just showing up is sometimes the hardest part. And in fact, when you talked about mental blocks, deciding whether you're going to or not going to is sometimes one of the greatest mental blocks. Because once you show up, typically, 95% of the time you do something, but you may not give it. You may just show up and not do anything. Like I went to the gym, but I didn't lift a finger. But the just showing up can sometimes be a mental block in and of itself.
Yeah,
a hard one.
Let's talk about consistency, because I think that's what is the or maybe the question is, what are the tools or things that can be deployed, if at all, to make that action easier, to make being consistent more consistent? Is there anything we can is there anything we can do from your experience that makes that, eases the pain of taking that first action?
Yeah, and you're right. Consistency is, in my humble opinion, the ultimate intention, the ultimate goal. And sometimes I have a challenge when I hear, conditioning coaches, for example, recommend that their clients train 3 days a week. when they've never been training before. And I understand the science behind it. You know, you need your body to rest and all, but to me, you're just asking them to yo-yo. You're going to go in for 3 days of the week and you're going to be out 4 days of the week, or you're going to be in 4 or 5 days of the week and you're going to be out, 2-3 days of the week. To me, that's not. So what I, in my practice, when people come to me to help with them, with help with their consistency, and let's just say they're new to weight training or just new to exercise, I actually recommend that they exercise every single day. But here's the catch. It's not always going to be heavy weightlifting. It may not only be weightlifting. Sometimes it'll be restorative, but you are carving out, and sometimes it's 10 minutes, 15 minutes. You are carving out a portion of your day every single day devoted to what we're going to call exercise. And what that look like may be different because I'm just the head person. I rely on the conditioning coach to obviously provide a scientific plan that goes with that. But when we're talking about consistency, well, we got to talk about doing it consistent, and that's every single day, and again, to go to what you've been sharing, which I'm completely on track with, it may look different. So something for me, what I've been doing now for over a year, but relatively a year is short in my lifetime. We go for a morning walk every single morning. We go for a morning walk. Now, my schedule is different. Sometimes I'm heading to the airport. Sometimes I have an early call. Sometimes I have nothing. So the length of that walk will vary depending on how our timing is. But the walk is non-negotiable. And 2 weeks ago, actually, maybe it was last week, I had 3 minutes. So I walked to the end of the driveway, and then turned around and came back inside. And my boyfriend continued on for his walk because he had the time, but I did it. And the interesting thing is that I was probably more proud of myself. I knew it wasn't going to be anything special, but I just did it to have the consistency. And I was more proud of myself for doing it than, doing a full 15, 20-minute walk, whatever usually we do. Mm-hmm. So when you think consistent, I mean consistent. Yeah. Every day do something if you're starting to create a habit.
Totally. I couldn't agree more. One of the biggest shifts for me, I have, and just like you, and I'll be curious to get, sounds like we've had a similar experience as it relates to kind of like our athletic identity. And because I come from very structured, like professional sport, and like training was training, right? And that had a very specific time period, and it was mapped out, all these things, and that's fine. However, as I've matured and gotten older and life has changed and I'm no longer pursuing professional athletics, the language shift for me has been to develop a consistent movement practice. And so what that allows me to do is exactly what you're talking about, is that means it takes on lots of different shapes. But my non-negotiable, and I have a few, but every day is to engage in a consistent movement practice. So I can walk, I can stretch, I can do mobility, I can do yoga, I can do a super hard workout, I can do, and I have laid out, I still have goals, I want to strength train X days a week. I want to run. I want to ride my bike. I want to ski. I want to do these things, but mixed in all, is just consistent movement, right? And that I'm in better overall health now, and certainly overall mental health, than I was when I was racing bikes professionally. Because now it's just a part of my life every day. It's not so polarized of like this thing, and then this day you can't possibly, right? Like it put all this weight and stigma. And again, I understand, some days just you need to sit on the couch, you need to rest. But it's totally changed my enjoyment of exercise by just doing it all the time and then letting it kind of be very, very light. And what that also has done is it has weighted those different movements equally. Whereas like I used to prioritize, I'd be like, okay, well, a walk isn't worth my time, and or mobility or strength or yoga, it doesn't mean as much to me. I literally had like some sort of a like cost analysis in my head of like, if I do like an interval session on the bike and a hard strength workout like that is worth more than these other things that are less intense, or it's not going to like yield as much fitness. I could like see these bar graphs almost like in my mind of like, okay, there's like more here. All that's gone away. I'm like, they're all equal, and I literally enjoy them all as much. Um, and the low intensity, like a walk, for instance, has actually become like the thing that I am almost probably more dogmatic about than even like higher intensity exercise. I'm like, I will choose a walk over just about anything because for what it does for my mind. Yeah. So I totally like, I love that. Like, I mean, I'm like, let's just, I was going to the airport the other morning, early flight. And I was like, you know what? Like 5 minutes, I'm just going to hit the foam roller and do some like a little bit of mobility. I'm going to be on an airplane. And I was like, I felt great. Like I felt great about myself walking through the airport. I was like, oh, like my body feels better. Like I'm more prepared for the day. And, it was such a small bout of like exercise or movement. So I totally see that. Yeah.
You brought up a really good point. I just want to, hopefully everyone just heard what you said, because I know that I can relate. The easy stuff isn't worth it. Like it doesn't weigh as much. Mm-hmm. Wow. A mindset shift to that can have a huge impact, as you just said.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you acknowledging that, because that's, I think, and that's such a big one for, I'm not saying that to say that I've, nailed it or I'm somehow like reached nirvana or anything, but for the people that I think you and I, work with, high performers in these spaces, there is just so much pressure that some things weigh more or carry more weight than others. And I think that there is a big opportunity to just let that weight be distributed over more things so that any one thing isn't quite so crushing, right? Isn't quite so weighty or heavy. And that just makes the decision-making process much easier too, like specifically in business, right? If you know that failure is fine, back to what we were talking about, and that like it's not, then you would just fail and move on, right? Like it wouldn't be so detrimental if you just recognized it and knew that one thing isn't really as heavy as you think it is, but that weight is distributed across lots of different pillars in your business, and you could fail and move on down the road, right? Or prepare for that failure, and it would be less disruptive.
Yeah. It's not the failure, it's the meaning we give to it that has such harsh consequences.
Yeah.
Now, there are big failures. Let's not underestimate.
Sure.
There certainly are. But generally speaking, it's not really the defeat, it's the meaning we give it that has such severe consequences for our ability to move on and be resilient.
Yeah, I came to that recognition. That's a really great point. And it's something it's good for me to be reminded of that. I came to that recognition a few years ago, working with businesses, and, there's this, I'm sure you've heard of it, and most of our audience will have heard of as, fail fast, right? Specifically in like high growth startups and things. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really tell me how you think about failure, right? Like that's an okay thing to say, but the real important thing is that when people fail, what's the language you use around that? Like how okay with failure are you really? And the real fact of the matter is that most of these companies, when I started recognize this, we're not really that okay with failure. They're like, oh, we want you to fail fast. Well, when somebody failed, they weren't that cool with it. Right? They were, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. Like, yeah. So there's this going a little deeper into failure and really like putting some language to that and being very clear about how we handle it, how we feel about it. Like you said, yeah, there's some massive failures. I've had some huge ones. But there is some ways I think to navigate that and get ahead of it a little bit and kind of like set expectations. It feels a little less disruptive when it happens. I want to talk about, it's a little bit off topic, but one of the things that I am really interested to get your thoughts on is one of the things you talk about is Well, I guess it's not as off topic because we're talking about failure, which is very stressful. And one of the things that you talk about is how stress isn't necessarily a bad thing, and that stress can be leveraged to be a positive. Those are my words, not yours. Can you just walk me through that? Because that feels like a very black or white thing for most people, right? Like we're all trying to run away from stress. Stress is bad, and if I could have less of it, I would automatically be improved. But you've talked about and written that that's maybe not the full story. But I want you to put that in your words for us, and I want to hear your opinion or your take there.
Yeah. I think people are lying when they say that they don't want any stress in their lives, because I'll tell you why. And I do this often when I'm on stage at a public speaking event, I'll ask people to raise their hand if they've ever volunteered for promotion, ever volunteered to escalate their physical performance and go from a 5K to a 10K to a half marathon, for example. Anyone volunteer to get married? Anyone volunteer to have children? Anyone volunteer to purchase properties? And everyone's raises their hands laughing. And that's challenge. That's stress. So, and why did you choose those things? Well, because I wanted to experience life. I wanted to have what contributes to a joyful, fulfilled life. Mm-hmm. So right then and there, you just said that stress contributes to fulfillment. And it's like this moment of aha. And then it's like, okay, well, I want that stress, but I just don't want the stress I didn't choose, right? Like, I don't want to have to deal with the stress you didn't choose. And that I understand as well. And going back to Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's flow state, his work, I mentioned the difference between anxiety and arousal is confidence. And the stress that feels overwhelming, daunting. When I think about anxiety, I really think about fear, anger, worry, frustration. Those are the stresses that we don't want in our lives. But once again, they can ignite us. I mean, that's the parent lifting the car off the baby, right? This is the igniter. Don't want it to last long because it can be very draining of energy, but there is some good stuff in that stress. In addition, though, how we expose ourselves to the stress is we go back to what athletes do, which is you bring it always back to your fundamental strengths. Any athlete in their highest competition, Olympics, World Championships, they walk out onto that field. They get to that starting gate ready to highlight their strengths, to do what they do best. It's in those moments of the highest competition, the highest stress, that they're not looking to necessarily improve anything technically, tactically. They're going to go out there owning what they already know they have inside them. And that brings confidence. And when you have confidence, you can move that feeling of anxiety, which is the stress we don't want, to that arousal, which is the challenge that we can embrace because we know that it'll help us to experience peak and fulfillment. So that's how we work with stress. Stress isn't the star of the movie. We are the stars of our own movie. And we're exposing ourselves to that stress, owning our strengths. And then with that, we enjoy, all of the fulfillments that stress can bring to us.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, that fine line between, or that subtle shift between anxiety and arousal. And it is fine and subtle, but it is there to be shifted for everyone. Just recognizing how you think about it, or how the role that it plays in your life. So to close things out, thinking about stress, and we'll assume that everybody has some, and maybe they would like to. So. Yeah. I mean, we could do I love that topic, and I love the relationship between friction and growth, like that's something that I'm personally fascinated with. And I really am maybe have like an unhealthy, um, you know, I'm really seeking it out. I'm like, if it's not there, I'm worried, to the extent that I'm like, it's the only way that I'm going to be better. Right.
The
And
friction,
so,
experiencing the
yeah,
friction.
yeah,
But
for
then
sure.
I'm gonna call you out if you're okay with it. You just said that you have really embraced these walks and
Uh-huh.
these, easier, like, so even though you want the challenge of your weight training and all and your endurance sports and climbing the mountains and getting on your bike, you've also embraced the recovery piece. But if you only recovered, then you become complacent. So yes,
Yeah.
you need the friction as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, yeah, it's interesting. I think about kind of like how that friction then gets processed into like, so for me, the walk is very intentional to use that specific example because I don't bring my phone. I don't listen to and that's where I like process the frictions where I think, and then I can then come back with some sort of like, not every time, not like it's immediate, but over time, I'll let these things will process. I'll be able to think, and I'll come back with like a tactical solution, right? I'll be, okay, great. Now I can do this. And without that time, it would just be noise. And I think that space is really important, right? Just like recovery, right? Like the only way to gain fitness is you don't gain fitness during exercise, right? It's when you're not exercising. It's when your body's processing stress. And so I'm very conscious, or I work to be very conscious of like the moments when I can process stress. And I think I've always been drawn to it, both in sport and in my career.
Good.
But yeah, it's important to know, like, for me, I'm like, okay, well, it can't just always be stress, because then it just builds. There has to be times when you process that and then you're able to do something with it mentally or physically, right? Whether it's on the performance side or the business side. But for those struggling to process stress, and I want to draw a through line here, but from like the athlete to the business, we've kind of dipped our toe in both sides, which is great. That's very much, there's so many parallels there. And for me, that's always been I can see that so clearly. Like what we learn in sport is what we're able to deploy in business. But for those that are struggling with processing that stress, be it in sport or in life and business or all of those things, what's your one takeaway? What's a thing that someone can do to help them build that toolbox or to manage the mental blocks? And I certainly imagine that a lot of those mental blocks can just feel like stress on the surface. So what's the tactical thing that someone can kind of sink their teeth into to feel like they're making some progress? Because I often get the sense that people they just don't know what the next thing is. They don't know how to turn the corner, how to make it feel different, how to make a different decision that gets them to the gym, that gets them, into a place of consistency. So yeah, what's that sound like from your perspective?
Yeah, I love that, Taylor. And if it's okay, I'm just going to jump on to what you were just talking about with recovery. And it's, your podcast is called The Endurance, but, and often we think that life is a marathon. That would be the thing that I would ask us all to ponder and see if we can tell ourselves a different story. So we might be in the business of endurance, but our life is a series of sprints. We stress, we recover. We stress, we recover. We stress, we recover. And if you think about a marathoner compared to a sprinter, and when you're out there running a marathon, we'll just use that as the example of an endurance sport, but it's business too. It's life. yes, you want to have your best performance, but part of that is conserving energy so that you can make it to the end. In sprint, there's no conserving energy. You're all out knowing that soon it's going to be over, that sprint, and you're going to have some recovery and it's going to feel great. And that recovery piece, when we take a walk, when we, close our eyes and get the legs up the wall, when we meditate, when we deep breathe, when we take just a step away, and that could be 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 10 minutes, even if it's less than 1 minute, to just go outside and look around. That's renewal of energy. The only way, like you said, we don't build muscle while we're working out. We're ripping and we're tearing when we're working out. It's in the recovery that we're renewing energy. And in life, when we take a moment and step away from our stressors, we're renewing energy. And what does that do? It gives us energy to use our strengths when we expose ourselves to the next stressor. So it's not even about learning a new tool. I bet you that every single person who's listening to this podcast now has some positive mental tools in their mental toolbox. High achievers, they've been through so many experiences. They've listened to your podcast. They have the tools. They may not have the energy to apply them when they need it. The only way to get energy is in that recovery piece. So let's treat life as a series of sprints, even though we may be running marathons. To treat life as a series of sprints. You go in knowing that you're going to go in for these 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and then you're going to come back out for a quick recovery bout, renew some energy, and then have the energy to expose yourself to the stress with your strengths.
I love that. That's great. I think, and that's, specifically in business, we talk about, there are sprints, right? You go, you're full gas, right? You can't half-ass it. You have to go in. So the recognition of that early and often, and then looking for or being strategic about when the recovery happens is the key. Like, it's the sprint is not the problem or the issue. It's the lack of recovery that makes it feel right, like it's not sustainable. That's great. I love that. Well, thank you so much. I'm grateful for your time. This has been awesome. I know everyone's going to get a ton out of this, and I certainly did. So I appreciate it. It was great to have you.
Thank you, Taylor.